My husband's nasty words hurt deep at the company barbecue when he was surrounded by his colleagues. He declared me useless in front of everyone, making me feel humiliated and enraged. Instead of breaking down, I resolved to reply in a way that would make a lasting impression. What I said to his CEO flipped the entire situation on its head. "Chris," his employer said, placing an arm around my husband's shoulder, "let's have a chat in the hallway, shall we?" Chris's gaze immediately shifted to me, as he had just witnessed me speaking with his employer. Panic was written all over his face when his supervisor let him leave the room, and everyone fell silent. Because the walls were thick, we could only hear muffled sounds, but they seemed hot and frightening. All eyes were on me, but I shrugged my shoulders, intending to deceive everyone into thinking I had nothing to do with it. Nobody needed to know I had put my husband's job in jeopardy. He may have said it as a joke, but making a fool of your wife in front of your co-workers was not something I could tolerate, and it wasn't the first time either. Chris regularly treated me differently in front of his buddies. He would belittle me and joke about it, and his pals would always join in. It was humiliating, but when he did it in front of his pals, I didn't care. But this time, things were different. This was his workplace, his co-workers, and his manager. Individuals with status and meaning in the world. They were not the smartest collection of men. To put it frankly, they were all quite dumb. This comment may not appear to be a major insult to some, but it made my blood boil. Me, the person who does absolutely everything around the house. He can't even prepare his own sandwiches. Monica's only role in our marriage is to bring me beer in the evening, which I could do on my own, he had stated, laughing heartily. The worst part, however, was that everybody laughed. "It was just a joke, Monica." I stood there, heart racing and furious on the inside, as all the men surrounding me chuckled, and I couldn't say anything. "Don't take everything so seriously, Monica. Can you imagine what they would have said if I had stood up for myself right there?" Ugh. Anyway, I did something better. I permanently harmed my husband. While the men continued to laugh, some so hard they were in tears, I stepped away to let off some steam. Right then, the ideal vengeance strategy came to mind. I went to the bar and got a glass of wine when I noticed Chris's boss standing alone. I approached Chris's supervisor, Derek, and offered him a drink. He politely accepted, and we began conversing. Yes, you read that correctly. It all seemed innocent at first, but I had come to him with one goal in mind: make Chris pay. So I told his boss the truth. Chris had been cheating on me with Derek's wife. What a revelation, huh? You might need some backstory, but I wouldn't make it too extensive. I quickly discovered a conversation Chris had with a woman named Jenna, and the topic was really sexual. They even sent one other nudes. Funny thing, Derek's wife is also named Jenna. A few weeks ago, I secretly accessed Chris's phone while he was sleeping because he had been acting suspiciously. The remainder of the evening was, to put it mildly, eventful. I envisioned Derek cursing Chris out, firing him on the spot, and blacklisting him from ever working in this branch again. But little did I know, none of that was happening. I held my breath as I circled back to Chris, who was talking to his supervisor in the hallway. Actually, neither of them returned to the room for the remainder of the evening. However, when I opened the door, no one was present. I scowled and approached one of the catering crew, asking if they'd seen Chris or Derek, but no one knew where they were. I stayed until I was the last one left, before deciding to check on them in the corridor. Determined to find Chris and Derek, I strolled through the complex, searching different rooms and halls. Each room I glanced into was vacant, and the silence exacerbated my worry. My heels clicked on the smooth flooring, echoing throughout the empty corridors. What exactly happened in that hallway conversation? My nerves were fraying with every vacant room I passed. The office seemed unusually quiet, in stark contrast to the boisterous BBQ outside. My mind raced with ideas as I walked further along. There was no evidence of Chris or Derek wherever I searched. The empty offices provided no hints, further increasing my anxiety. I replayed the events of the evening in my head, wondering if I had missed any cues. The previous laughing seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a heavy silence that lingered in the air like a dense fog. I examined the conference rooms, the break room, and even the facilities, but they appeared to have vanished. As I searched, I began to experience anxiety and unease. Did Derek fire Chris on the spot? My steps became quicker and more frenzied as I continued my search. The desolate hallways seemed to go on forever, with each turn resulting in more unanswered questions. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone horribly wrong, and my breathing became faster with each passing minute. My mind was racing with possibilities, each more frightening than the previous. Were they having a showdown? I couldn't help but wonder whether my strategy had gone wrong somehow. I bit my lip, hoping to quiet my racing thoughts. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. The walls appeared to close in on me, heightening my terror. I needed to know the outcome of my actions. What if Chris turned the tables on me? Doubt gnawed at my confidence. Perhaps he had spun a narrative, and now I was in trouble. Determined to find out what had happened, I went to the parking lot. The cold night air greeted me as I went outdoors, in stark contrast to the suffocating tension inside. I scoured the surroundings for any traces of them. My heart pounded in my chest as I moved along the rows of cars, seeking for a clue. It was my final hope for finding Chris and Derek. The lot was barely lit, and shadows stretched across the tarmac. As I neared the parking lot, I noticed a shadowy figure near Chris's car. The person was somewhat obscured by the poor illumination and neighboring woods, but it was evident that someone was present. The silence of the night was nearly deafening, and the tension in the air was obvious. My heart skipped a beat, and I slowed down, attempting to figure out who it was. My stomach ache intensified. My heart hammered as I realized it was Jenna, Derek's wife. What was she doing here? My mind raced with questions. She looked around nervously as if she were waiting for someone or trying to hide from something. The sight of her made my heart race, and I felt a mixture of uncertainty and horror. She stood awkwardly beside the car, her face half lighted by the flickering parking lot light. She was astonished to see me and quickly glanced away. Her body tightened, and she took a short step back, looking around as if planning an escape. The uneasy stillness between us was punctuated only by the distant buzz of traffic. I could see the uneasiness in her eyes and the way her hands fidgeted at her sides. Whatever she was doing here, she obviously didn't expect to run into me. I couldn't let her leave without receiving some answers. She hesitated, her gaze shifting from me to the car. I could see the conflict on her face. She knew something crucial. My determination hardened. I was not going to go without finding out what was going on. I stepped forward, trying to keep my voice quiet and steady. "Jenna! Wait!" I cried out, hoping she wouldn't flee. "Jenna! What are you doing here?" I inquired, my voice steady. The tension in the air was palpable, and I could see she was considering her options. The seconds seemed like hours. Finally, she took a hesitant breath and turned to face me, her countenance troubled. She froze, meeting my stare for a fleeting second before moving away. Her lips moved, as if to speak, but she paused. "What do you mean, someone else?" I inquired, bewildered. My confusion must have shown because she took a deep breath, seemingly unsure what to say next. I could see she was battling an internal battle, and my patience was growing thin. What was she hiding? Jenna's eyes were filled with apprehension, and she bit her lip. The night air felt more colder as I waited for her reaction. Jenna appeared nervous, but soon revealed the truth. Her hands trembled slightly, and she embraced herself, appearing fragile. I moved closer, silently encouraging her to continue. Whatever she had to say, it was evident that she struggled to get the words out. Her voice scarcely rose beyond a whisper. "There's something you need to know," she added, looking around as if someone may listen. "A man came and picked Chris up in a black SUV," she told me. I needed to learn more. Chris had departed, with who else? My mind raced with questions. Who was this man? And why was Chris leaving with him? The discovery simply added to my uncertainty and anxiety. Her gaze shifted to mine, judging my reaction. My heart skipped a beat as I absorbed her words. "I think it was one of Derek's friends," she added. My mind raced with options. If Derek's friends were involved, this may become more problematic than I anticipated. What type of trouble had Chris gotten himself into? The parts of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture remained unclear. Jenna's voice was unsteady, and she looked nervously toward the parking lot entrance. Determined to follow this lead, I summoned a taxi to pursue the black SUV. As we waited for the cab, the minutes seemed to stretch into hours. My heart hammered with a combination of terror and drive. I was not going to let Chris walk away without receiving some answers. Jenna remained silent, watching me with concern as I placed the call. The night was far from ended. We drove around for what seemed like hours, looking for the SUV. The cab driver was patient, circling through numerous neighborhoods while I looked for the vehicle. The streets were mainly empty, with only a few late-night wanderers and parked cars. Jenna sat quietly beside me, her face tensed with concern. The anticipation was nearly excruciating, and I couldn't get over the feeling that time was running out. Finally, we found it parked outside a dilapidated apartment complex. The building appeared to have seen better days, with peeling paint and damaged windows. This was the lead we needed. I hurriedly paid the taxi driver, and Jenna and I stepped out, nervous. My heart raced when the cab came to a stop. The black SUV was unmistakable, resting beneath a wavering street light. I walked up to the building, listening to Chris and Derek argue. I hesitated for a bit, before steeling myself and moving closer. The sound of their dispute became clearer with each step, and I realized I needed to confront them. This was my chance to find the answers I needed. Their words were loud and heated, flowing out through an open window. I couldn't make out every word, but the tone was clear. They quickly stopped talking as soon as they noticed me. As I stepped into the dimly lighted hallway, Chris and Derek turned to face me. Their looks were a mix of wrath and surprise, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Chris appeared to be about to say something, but the words died on his lips. Derek's eyes narrowed. I could feel the weight of his gaze. Their looks were a mix of wrath and amazement. The air was full of unspoken words and unresolved tension. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for what was about to happen. This confrontation was unavoidable, and I was prepared to meet it full on. Chris's cheeks reddened, and his lips opened and closed, as if looking for the proper words. Derek's jaw was set, his gaze steely and calculated. Chris attempted to stutter out an excuse, but Derek cut him off. Chris's face turned pale, and he swallowed hard, obviously at a loss for words. He was desperate, but Derek would have none of it. The hush that followed was full of unsaid accusations. "Save it, Chris," Derek said, his tone chilly. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could see panic in Chris's eyes. Derek stared at me and said, "I know about the affair, Monica." His comments struck me like a slap. I could sense the rage coming from him. My heart beat in my chest as I met his eyes and tried to maintain a calm demeanor. The charge hovered in the air, and I knew this argument wasn't finished. The stakes had just been heightened, so I wanted to remain calm. My heart raced as Derek's words set in. The room felt like it was closing in around me. He assumed I was out for retribution, exploiting his wife's adultery to harm Chris. This misconception had significant consequences. I needed to tread carefully, or risk making things worse. I knew he believed I was exposing his wife's infidelity. The puzzle pieces clicked into place. I knew he believed I was exposing his wife's infidelity. I had a decision to make. I could either clarify the truth or take advantage of the misunderstanding. The room was packed with tension, and every second was crucial. I needed to determine immediately how to proceed. Derek was angry not just at Chris, but also at Jenna. This misconception has the potential to either wreck everything or benefit me. This misconception has the potential to either wreck everything or benefit me. The air was thick with tension, and I could sense Derek's skepticism building. I took a deep breath and prepared to direct the discussion in a way that would serve my objective. The next words I speak could change everything. I spotted an opportunity in the pandemonium. If I played my cards well, I could flip this situation to my advantage. Derek snatched Chris's phone and began scrolling through it with rising wrath. Chris stood there, sweat on his brow, his face a mask of fear. The room was quiet, save for the odd beep from the phone. Derek's countenance darkened with each swipe, his rage growing like a storm about to explode. His fingers flew quickly across the screen, and his eyes narrowed as he read each message. Derek's face twisted in fury as he read the filthy messages. Chris's protests fell mute in the face of the incriminating evidence. I watched Derek's serenity crack, his rage threatening to erupt. The tension in the room made it seem as if it was about to explode. His eyes burned with rage, and his jaw tightened. Each communication seemed to aggravate his wrath, the deception biting deep. "You're a shame, Christopher. How could you do this to Monica and me?" Derek was incensed. His voice was low and full of malice. Chris started to respond, but Derek's look hushed him. The accusation weighed thick in the air, with each syllable like a nail in Chris's coffin. Chris's eyes were filled with defeat, as he realized there was no way out of the truth. He hurled the phone back at Chris, unable to hold his temper. Derek's wrath was evident, and his hands trembled as he tried not to lash out physically. The phone lay between them like an abandoned weapon, its contents exposed for everyone to see. The device landed on Chris's chest and clattered to the floor. Chris flinched, his eyes filled with fear and shame. Chris stood there, dumbfounded and defeated. Derek's rage and the proof on the phone left him speechless. His shoulders fell, and he looked at the floor, avoiding everyone's gaze. The silence in the room was deafening, with each second stretching into infinity. I could see Chris's arrogance crumbling, leaving only a devastated man behind. Chris attempted to deny it, but the proof was incontrovertible. There was no way out. Even his own words sounded empty. The messages on his phone provided a clear and damning picture. Each attempt to excuse his behavior failed, and the truth of his situation began to sink in. "Derek, you have to believe me," he said, his voice cracking. "This isn't what it looks like." "I swear, Derek, that isn't what it seems." "I have been set up," Chris protested. His voice became louder and more urgent, but Derek's expression remained stony. "You've got to believe me. This is all some kind of mistake." His eyes begged Derek for comprehension, but there was none to be found. The room felt like it was closing in on him, with the walls echoing his frantic speech. Derek turned his back on him, ignoring his protests. The dismissal was definitive, indicating that Derek had made his decision. Chris's shoulders dropped, and his soul broke. He looked around the room, expecting someone would come to his defense, but the quiet was oppressive. Chris's shoulders dropped, and his soul broke. He looked around the room, expecting someone would come to his defense, but the quiet was oppressive. Chris looked around urgently for help. He was completely alone in his humiliation. However, everyone else sat silent, watching the spectacle develop with a mixture of horror and contempt. His once confident exterior had shattered, leaving nothing but a shell of the guy he once was. His gaze raced from face to face, searching for a glimmer of pity, a lifeline to grasp to. However, everyone else sat mute, watching the spectacle develop. The weight of their gazes felt like a physical force pushing down on Chris. Nobody came up to give a nice word or a helpful hand. The room was filled with a harsh, critical stillness. Everyone there seemed to grasp that this was the end of Chris's ruse. The truth had emerged, and there was no turning back. As Derek went away, Chris collapsed to the floor, defeated. The weight of his deeds and the consequences that were now bearing down on him was too great to bear. The room around him appeared to fade, the murmuring of observers receding into the background. His legs gave out beneath him, and he dropped, head in his hands. All he could feel was a crushing sense of personal failure. "Monica, why did you do this?" he whispered with tears in his eyes. His voice was broken, scarcely audible, and filled with a raw, throbbing pain. He looked up at me, his countenance a mixture of uncertainty and sadness. The man who formerly exuded arrogance and bravado was now reduced to pleading for answers, desperate to comprehend what had gone so wrong. I stood erect, a sense of vindication sweeping over me. It had been a long time coming. The humiliation, the disdain, it all contributed to this. As I gazed down at Chris, the power dynamic had altered dramatically. I felt powerful, in command, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. This was my moment of justice. "You brought this on yourself, Chris," I stated coldly. "You believed you could keep treating me as if I were nothing. But now you realize you can see what happens when you push someone too far." The words hung in the air, definite and unwavering. My voice was calm and devoid of pity. He needed to hear this to grasp the significance of his acts. He looked up at me, angry and frustrated. He wanted to lash out, defend himself, but the weight of the truth held him back. He realized he couldn't reverse what had been done. The reality of his condition was unavoidable. His eyes were crimson, and his face was contorted with a variety of emotions. "Monica," he began, but his words stuttered. I leaned down, my voice hard and firm. "You think you've been wronged? You haven't seen anything yet." My voice was clear and unwavering. Chris's expression contorted with uncertainty and a tinge of terror. But I persisted, prepared to expose the reality that would fully demolish his defenses. When I stared Chris in the eyes, I felt a definite shift of power. I inquired, my tone chilly and firm. "Do you believe you have been wronged?" I told Chris. "You haven't seen anything yet. Chris, I know you have never slept with Derek's wife. His eyes widened in surprise as the reality of my statement struck him like a ton of bricks. The room appeared to become even quieter as everyone pondered this knowledge. He blinked, apparently surprised by the strength of my statements. There was another Jenna. Chris, I know you have never slept with Derek's wife. There was another Jenna. His face furrowed from confusion and awareness. I've been talking to the real Jenna, and she wants to meet Derek to clear this up. My statements were crisp, cutting through his denials and deflections. Chris appeared to want to dispute, but he knew there was nothing he could say to counter the facts I presented. I've been talking to the real Jenna, and she wants to meet Derek to clear this up. The weight of my remarks hung in the air. Chris's face turned pale as he understood the gravity of the situation. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words emerged. The truth was undeniable, and the repercussions were unavoidable. This was all to show Derek who you truly are, I said. Derek, standing nearby, processed everything with increasing clarity. The truth had been revealed, and Chris's facade had been completely shattered. Now was the time for him to confront the repercussions of his conduct. The finality in my voice left no room for debate. Chris appeared defeated, with the fight completely gone from his eyes. The real Jenna arrived, and while it stung, I knew she was oblivious of Chris's marriage. Jenna's face was filled with confusion and grief as she entered the room. She looked at Chris, then at Derek, attempting to comprehend the uncomfortable situation. This was the moment of truth. Her appearance was the last nail in Chris's coffin. When Chris saw her, his face twisted with shame and horror. Jenna confirmed my claim, exposing Chris's deceptive behavior. He never mentioned it. The gathering fell silent as Jenna told her story, drawing a picture of a man who had lied and maneuvered his way into her life. Derek listened attentively, his rage boiling beneath the surface. I didn't know he was married, she added, her voice cracking. Chris's deception was exposed for all to see. Derek apologized sincerely to me for the mistake. His eyes met mine, and I could see the sincerity of his apology. The weight of the evening's disclosures weighed heavily on both of us, but Derek's remarks provided a feeling of resolution. Monica, I'm so sorry, he continued, his voice full of sadness. I had no idea what kind of person Chris truly was. Derek pledged to treat Chris appropriately, swearing retribution. He won't get away with this, Derek insisted forcefully. I'll make sure he faces the consequences. His passion was undeniable, and I knew Chris's time at the organization was limited. Even while the events of the night lingered, the promise of justice provided a feeling of closure. Chris stood there, mute and heartbroken. Chris was left to face the consequences of his actions alone, as his world crumbled. The reality of his betrayal and deception had separated him from everyone. He looked around, seeing despair and rage on every face. There was no escape, no one to turn to. The man who formerly thrived on hubris and deception was now left to face the consequences of his decisions entirely alone.